The ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles, but Vivienne Thorne felt only the cold press of Edmund Garrick's hand against her waist. His fingers dug in just enough to remind her who owned her now, though the smile he wore for the assembled guests suggested tenderness. "Stand straighter, darling," he murmured against her ear, his breath hot and sour with wine. "You represent my investment now. Do try to look grateful." The announcement of their engagement had been made an hour ago, and every minute since had been a slow suffocation. Lords and ladies offered congratulations that felt like condolences. Their eyes lingered on her face, searching for signs of joy they would not find. Edmund's mother had already informed her that the wedding would take place in 6 weeks, that her opinions on flowers or music were unnecessary, that a woman in her position should simply be relieved anyone wanted her at all. Women like her didn't get chosen. They got used. "Smile," Edmund commanded, steering her toward another cluster of guests. His grip tightened when she tried to create distance between their bodies. "Lord Helmsley is watching. He holds considerable influence over the land contracts I need. You will charm him." Vivienne had practiced this role her entire life. The dutiful daughter, the obedient woman. The grateful bride-to-be who understood her father's gambling debts had made her a commodity to be traded. She could smile, she could curtsy, she could pretend the walls weren't closing in. But when Edmund laughed at something Lord Helmsley said, a crude joke about breaking in young wives, and squeezed her waist as if she were part of the punchline, something fractured inside her chest. "Excuse me," she whispered, pulling away with more force than she'd intended. "I need a moment." Edmund's eyes flashed warning, but they were surrounded by too many witnesses for him to object openly. 5 minutes, he said through his teeth, maintaining his public smile. "No more!" Vivienne walked toward the retiring rooms with measured steps, her spine rigid, her face composed. But once she passed through the gilded doors into the corridor beyond, she quickened her pace. The designated ladies' retiring room would be full of Edmund's female relatives, all eager to offer advice on wifely submission. She needed air, space, silence. A door stood ajar further down the hallway, a servant's entrance to what looked like a storage room for extra furniture and decorative screens. The palace was enormous, a maze of rooms most guests would never see. This one appeared empty and blessedly dark. Vivienne slipped inside and closed the door behind her, leaning against it as her carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Her breath came in short gasps. The corset that had felt merely uncomfortable all evening now seemed designed to crush her ribs. Moonlight filtered through a high window, illuminating shapes draped in cloth, chairs waiting to be repaired, a broken harp, folding screens painted with pastoral scenes. She moved deeper into the room, putting distance between herself and the door, and sank onto a cushioned bench near the far wall. What if hiding was the only choice she'd ever had? Her father's voice echoed in her memory, weak from his deathbed. "You'll honor this arrangement, Vivienne. Edmund Garrick is offering to clear everything. The estate, the debts, your future. Promise me you'll see it through." She had promised. What daughter wouldn't, watching her father die? But he hadn't known, couldn't have known, the kind of man Edmund truly was. Or perhaps he had known and simply hadn't cared, as long as the debts were paid. Vivienne pressed her palms against her eyes, willing herself not to cry. Crying solved nothing. In 6 weeks she would be Lady Garrick, and tears would be an indulgence she could no longer afford. A sound froze her breath in her throat. Movement, from the darkest corner of the room. The subtle shift of fabric, the quiet intake of breath from someone who had just realized they were no longer alone. Vivienne's heart hammered against her ribs as a shadow detached itself from the wall. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the careful grace of a predator, deciding whether to reveal itself. Then a voice, deep and edged with dry amusement. "If you're hiding, you chose poorly. This is my escape route." The shadow stepped into the moonlight, and Vivienne's stomach dropped. Callum Ravenswood, Duke of Thornfield. She recognized him instantly. Though they had never been formally introduced, everyone knew Thornfield, not just because of his title or his considerable wealth, but because of his reputation for absolute propriety. He never courted scandal, never broke protocol, never associated with anyone who might tarnish his family's sterling name. And here she was, alone with him in a darkened room, having fled her own engagement ball. "Your Grace," she managed, rising quickly and executing a curtsy that felt absurd in the circumstances. "I apologize, I didn't realize. I'll leave immediately." "Stay." The word was quiet, but commanded obedience nonetheless. He moved closer, and she could make out his features now. Strong jaw, dark hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it, eyes that assessed her with uncomfortable precision. "If you return to that ballroom within 5 minutes of leaving, Garrick will know you came somewhere like this. Somewhere private. He strikes me as the type to make assumptions." Vivian's throat tightened. "You know Lord Garrick." "I know of him." Something in Thornfield's voice suggested he didn't approve of what he knew. "I was pressured to attend tonight's announcement. Politics." He said the word like a curse. "I've spent the last hour being told I should publicly endorse your upcoming marriage. Something about land contracts and trade routes that require unified aristocratic support." "And will you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Endorse it?" Thornfield studied her face in the moonlight. His gaze caught on something, the redness around her eyes perhaps, or the way her hands trembled slightly despite her attempts to still them. "That depends," he said slowly, "on whether the bride requires endorsement or intervention." The careful neutrality of his tone made it impossible to discern his meaning. Was he offering help or judging her weakness? Vivienne had learned to expect the latter from men of his station. "I require nothing, Your Grace." She lifted her chin. "My situation is my own concern." "Is it?" He moved closer still, close enough that she could see the crease between his brows. "You're crying." "I'm not." But even as she said it, she felt the wetness on her cheeks and realized he was right. When had that happened? Thornfield did something then that shocked her more than his presence in the room. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her, not with pity, but with the matter-of-fact courtesy he might show an equal. "Your fiancé humiliated you in front of Helmsley," he said quietly. "I saw it happen before you left. If you'd stayed in that ballroom one more minute, you would have either slapped him or fainted. Neither would have served you well." Vivian took the handkerchief with shaking fingers. "You're very observant. I'm very bored by social performances. Real emotion is more interesting." He leaned against the edge of a covered table, settling in as if they had all the time in the world. "How long have you been engaged to Garrick?" "The contracts were signed 3 weeks ago, upon my father's death. Tonight was the public announcement." 3 weeks. Thornfield's expression darkened. "And you already look like a woman being led to execution." "That's hardly—" "I don't deal in flattery or fiction, Miss Thorne." He crossed his arms. "I've watched Garrick operate for years. He's a predator who uses social convention as a hunting ground. If you're trapped in a contract with him, you have my sympathy. But sympathy won't help you." The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in weeks. "What would help me, Your Grace?" The question came out sharper than intended. "Enlighten me. You clearly have opinions." "Breaking the contract would help you." Vivian laughed, a sound without humor. "On what grounds? My father signed everything legally. The debts are real. Edmund holds every advantage. Breaking the contract would leave me destitute and destroy what little remains of my family's name. So you'll martyr yourself instead." "I'll honor my father's final wish." She met Thornfield's eyes directly. "Not all of us have the luxury of choosing our fate, Your Grace. Some of us must simply endure it." Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or recognition. "You're stronger than you look." "I have to be." They stood in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the ball filtering through the walls. Vivian knew she should leave, should return to Edmund's side before he came looking for her. But this room felt like a pocket outside of time, a brief respite where she could breathe without someone's hands controlling her movements. "May I ask you something?" Thornfield's voice had gentled slightly. "And you may refuse to answer." She nodded. "Do you want to marry him?" No one had asked her that. Not once. They had informed her of the arrangement, praised her for accepting it, told her how fortunate she was, but no one had cared what she wanted. "No," she whispered. "I don't." Thornfield straightened, and for a moment something fierce flickered across his face. Then he schooled his features back to neutrality. "Then we have a problem." "We?" You've been seen coming down this corridor. I watched Lady Ashworth take note. She's Garrick's aunt, and the worst gossip in London. By morning, half the ton will believe you disappeared alone with a man during your own engagement ball. He paused. Your reputation may already be compromised. Horror flooded through Vivienne. But we've done nothing. Truth is irrelevant when scandal makes a better story. Thornfield moved toward the door, then stopped. When you return to the ballroom, go directly to the ladies' retiring room. Spend 10 minutes there, allowing yourself to be seen by multiple witnesses. If anyone asks, you felt ill, nothing more. And you? I'll leave through the servants' entrance and rejoin the ball from a different direction. With luck, Lady Ashworth will assume she was mistaken about what she saw. Vivienne's mind raced. Why are you helping me? Thornfield looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Because someone should, and because... He hesitated, then seemed to decide against whatever he'd been about to say. Because you deserve better than Edmund Garrick. He opened the door carefully, checked the corridor, then disappeared without another word. Vivienne stood alone in the darkened room, clutching his handkerchief, her heart beating too fast. She had come here to hide from her future. Instead, she'd encountered a man who saw through her careful masks and seemed to care that she was drowning. It changed nothing, she told herself firmly. Thornfield was being courteous, nothing more. She would return to the ball, smile at Edmund's side, and continue down the path her father had chosen for her. But as she made her way back to the ballroom, following Thornfield's instructions precisely, one thought circled through her mind like a prayer or a curse. What if hiding was no longer enough? The remaining hours of the ball passed in a blur of forced smiles and Edmund's increasingly possessive grip on her arm. He'd been drinking more, his words slurring slightly as he introduced her to business associates who looked at her the way men appraised horses at auction. By the time the final guests departed, Vivienne's face ached from maintaining her expression of gracious contentment. You disappeared for quite some time earlier, Edmund said, as he escorted her to her carriage. His tone was light, but his fingers bit into her elbow. I trust you weren't doing anything foolish. I felt unwell. I rested in the ladies' retiring room. He studied her face as if searching for lies. See that it doesn't happen again. My wife will not be seen as weak or dramatic. You'll learn to manage your constitution better. I'm not yet your wife, my lord. The words slipped out before she could stop them, that impulsive truth-telling that had always gotten her into trouble. Edmund's expression froze, and for a moment she saw pure rage flicker across his features before he smoothed it away. No, he agreed softly. Not yet. But you will be, Miss Thorne. Make no mistake about that. The contracts are ironclad. Your signature is already on them. You belong to me now, in every way that matters. He handed her into the carriage with exaggerated courtesy, but the threat hung in the air between them. As the horses pulled away from the palace, Vivienne looked back and saw a lone figure standing in one of the high windows, tall, dark-haired, watching her departure. Thornfield. She turned away quickly, but his handkerchief was still tucked in her sleeve. A small piece of evidence that someone in that glittering ballroom had seen her as more than property. The week that followed brought no relief. Edmund called on her daily at her family's small London townhouse, each visit a performance of courtship for the servants' benefit, while his private words cut like glass. He brought her gifts, expensive, impersonal things that showcased his wealth rather than any knowledge of her preferences. A gaudy necklace. A mare so high-spirited she'd be dangerous to ride. Books on household management and wifely duties. You'll need to study these, he said, dropping a stack of texts on her parlour table. My mother reports you're ignorant of proper household management. We'll correct that before the wedding. Vivienne bit back the retort that she'd been managing her father's household for years, while he gambled away their income. Arguing accomplished nothing except to amuse Edmund. But the worst moment came 4 days after the ball, when Edmund arrived with documents requiring her signature. A formality, he assured her, spreading the papers across her writing desk. Simply confirming the terms your father agreed to. Your dowry lands transfer to me upon marriage. Any remaining debts become my responsibility. Standard arrangements. Vivienne read through the dense legal language carefully, and her blood ran cold. This clause here, it says I renounce all claim to my mother's property in Yorkshire. That cottage was left to me specifically. It's not part of my father's estate. A technicality. Edmund waved his hand dismissively. Everything that was yours becomes mine at marriage anyway. This merely streamlines the process. But my mother wanted me to have that cottage. She specified. Edmund's hand came down hard on the desk, making her jump. Your mother is dead, Vivian. Your father is dead. Their wants are irrelevant. Sign the paper. I'd like to have my solicitor review. You don't have a solicitor. Your father's man works for me now. I bought his loyalty along with your family's debts. Edmund leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. Sign the paper, or I'll activate the penalty clause in our contract that allows me to seize the Yorkshire property immediately as compensation for your breach of good faith. Vivian's hand shook as she signed. She watched Edmund fold the document and tuck it into his coat pocket, and felt another piece of her freedom disappear. That night, alone in her room, she pulled out Thornfield's handkerchief and stared at the embroidered crest. She knew she should return it, should avoid any connection to a man who might represent danger to her already precarious position. Instead, she tucked it under her pillow and tried to remember what it felt like to be treated as if she mattered. The summons came the next morning, delivered by a royal messenger in full livery. Vivienne stared at the heavy paper, her heart sinking as she read the formal language. She was commanded to appear at Thornfield House within 2 days to discuss matters pertaining to her recent engagement and concerns raised by certain members of the aristocracy. What does this mean? She asked the messenger, though she already suspected. I'm not privy to the details, miss, but the Duke requests your presence urgently. He suggests you bring appropriate luggage for an extended stay. Extended stay. The words echoed in her mind with ominous weight. Edmund arrived within the hour, summoned by her desperate note. He read the summons with narrowed eyes, then crushed the paper in his fist. That interfering bastard, he muttered. I should have known he'd cause problems. What problems? What is this about? Edmund's smile was sharp and cold. It seems someone started a rumour that you were seen entering a private room with Thornfield during our engagement ball. Lady Ashworth has been gossiping, and now the Duchess of Marbury, Thornfield's godmother and a woman with far too much influence, is demanding an investigation into the propriety of our engagement. Vivian's stomach dropped. But nothing happened. It doesn't matter what happened. Edmund began pacing, his movements agitated. What matters is perception. The aristocracy takes these things seriously. If there's even a whisper of impropriety, our marriage could be delayed. Or worse, certain parties might use it as grounds to block the land contracts I need. So what do we do? Edmund stopped pacing and looked at her with calculation she didn't trust. We use it. What? There's an old protocol, rarely invoked anymore, but still technically valid. When a betrothed woman's reputation is questioned, she can be placed under the guardianship of an unimpeachable moral authority for a period of character restoration. His smile widened. Thornfield is considered the most unimpeachable man in England. If you stay at his estate under his guardianship for 6 weeks, returning to me with his personal endorsement of your virtue, no one will dare question our marriage. 6 weeks. Vivian's voice came out strangled. You want me to live in Thornfield's house? Under his supervision, along with his full household staff and probably his godmother as well. It will be utterly proper and utterly boring. Edmund moved closer, his voice dropping. But here's the important part, darling. There's a clause in the guardianship protocol. If you violate any rule of proper conduct during those 6 weeks, if you give Thornfield any reason to question your character, the original marriage contract can be voided. And I, as the injured party, can claim your family's remaining assets as compensation. The trap crystallized in her mind with horrible clarity. You're sending me there hoping I'll fail. I'm sending you there to give you one last chance to prove you're worth the investment I've made. Edmund gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Behave perfectly. Follow every rule. Return to me in 6 weeks with Thornfield's blessing, and we'll be married as planned. But if you slip, if you show one moment of the rebellious spirit you keep trying to hide, you'll lose everything. Your name, your property, and any hope of a respectable future. He released her and straightened his coat. The choice is yours, Vivian. 6 weeks of good behavior or utter ruin. I'll inform Thornfield you accept his guardianship. After Edmund left, Vivian sat in her empty parlor and tried to breathe through the panic. She was being sent to live in the home of a man she'd met once, a man who had shown her kindness in a darkened room and then disappeared from her life. Now he would be her judge, her warden. The person who would decide whether she deserved to escape Edmund Garrick or whether she should be handed back to him like defective merchandise. She should feel terrified, trapped, helpless. Instead, for the first time in weeks, she felt something that might have been hope. Because Callum Ravenswood had looked at her in that room and said, "You deserve better than Edmund Garrick." And now fate had placed her directly in his power, giving her 6 weeks to discover if he'd meant it. She arrived at Thornfield House 2 days later, her few belongings packed into a single trunk. The estate was magnificent, grey stone and climbing ivy, set among rolling hills that seemed to stretch forever. Beautiful and intimidating in equal measure. A stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Winters met her at the entrance. "Miss Thorne, His Grace is expecting you in the library. I'll have your things taken to your room." Vivian followed the housekeeper through hallways, lined with ancestral portraits that seemed to judge her with painted eyes. The library doors stood open, revealing floor-to-ceiling shelves and the warm glow of afternoon sun through tall windows. Thornfield stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him as he stared out at the grounds. He wore simple country clothes rather than formal attire, and somehow that made him seem even more imposing. A man comfortable in his power, needing no costume to assert it. "Miss Thorne," Mrs. Winters announced. He turned, and Vivian felt that same jolt of recognition she'd experienced in the darkened room. His eyes found hers immediately, searching, assessing. "Mrs. Winters, thank you. We'll take tea in an hour." He waited until the housekeeper left before speaking again. "I apologize for the circumstances that brought you here." "Did you start the rumor?" Vivian asked bluntly. "About seeing me in that room?" "No." His expression hardened. "But I should have anticipated that others might. Lady Ashworth saw you go down that corridor. She likely saw me as well, though she couldn't have known we were in the same room. Her imagination filled in the gaps. And now I'm here, in your custody for 6 weeks." Vivian moved further into the library, needing to do something with the nervous energy coursing through her. Lord Garrick explained the terms. "If I misbehave in any way, he can void our contract and take what little I have left." "I'm aware." Thornfield's voice was tight. "The guardianship protocol is archaic and fundamentally unjust. But once the Duchess of Marbury demanded an investigation, certain wheels were set in motion that couldn't be stopped. So you're stuck with me." "I volunteered." He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "When I learned what Garrick was attempting, I made it clear to everyone involved that if a guardianship was necessary, I would personally oversee it. No one else." Vivian studied his face, trying to understand. "Why?" "Because Garrick would have manipulated any other arrangement to his advantage. At least this way, you're under the protection of someone who—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Someone who believes you deserve fairness." "Fairness," she repeated softly. "That's a word I haven't heard in some time." Thornfield moved to his desk and picked up a document. "These are the official terms of your stay. You'll have your own suite of rooms. You're free to move about the house and grounds as you wish. Meals will be taken in the dining room unless you're ill. You'll attend the few social events I'm obligated to host, acting as my ward. And at the end of 6 weeks, I'll provide a formal assessment of your character to the aristocratic council overseeing this matter. And to Lord Garrick." "And to Lord Garrick," he confirmed. "If my assessment is positive, and I see no reason it wouldn't be, your marriage contract will proceed as planned." Something in his voice suggested he found that outcome distasteful, but his face remained neutral. "What if your assessment is negative?" Vivian asked. "Then the contract will be voided. Garrick will pursue financial damages and you'll be—" He stopped. "Ruined," she finished. "Destitute and unmarriageable." "Yes." The word hung between them, heavy with consequence. Vivian straightened her spine. "Then I suppose I should be very well behaved, Your Grace. I'm not interested in your performance of good behavior." Thornfield set the document down and looked at her directly. "I'm interested in the truth. For 6 weeks you'll live in this house and I'll observe who you actually are. Not the frightened woman being sold to Garrick, not the obedient daughter honoring her father's dying wish, but you, Vivian Thorne, without the masks. The use of her first name sent a shock through her system. That's a dangerous proposition. Is it? He moved closer, his expression intense. Or is it the first honest thing that's happened to you since your father died? She wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Because he was right. Everyone else in her life wanted her to perform, to submit, to disappear into the role they'd assigned her. Thornfield wanted her to exist. I don't know how to do that, she admitted quietly. Be myself. Then these 6 weeks will be educational for us both. He gestured toward the door. Mrs. Winters will show you to your rooms. We dress for dinner at 7. And Miss Thorne? She paused at the threshold. Yes? Welcome to Thornfield. Whatever happens at the end of these 6 weeks, you're safe here. I give you my word on that. Vivian nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled to the safety of her assigned chambers. Only when the door closed behind her did she let herself wonder what his word might actually mean, and whether 6 weeks would be enough time to discover if Callum Ravenswood was her salvation or simply a different kind of trap. The first week at Thornfield passed in a cautious dance of proximity and distance. Vivian took her meals in the dining room, sitting at the far end of the massive table while Thornfield occupied his seat at the head. They spoke of neutral things, the weather, the estate's history, books she might borrow from the library. Nothing personal, nothing dangerous. But she felt his eyes on her constantly, that assessing gaze that seemed to see through every careful wall she'd built. Mrs. Winters ran the household with military precision, and the rest of the staff treated Vivian with polite warmth that surprised her. The maids who helped her dress each morning chatted about village gossip. The cook asked her preferences for meals. Even the stern groundskeeper offered to show her the estate's famous rose garden. It was the opposite of the cold reception she'd expected in a house where she was essentially a prisoner. On the 4th day, she encountered Thornfield in the library, surrounded by account books and correspondence. He looked tired, a lock of dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him seem younger, more approachable. I'm sorry, she said, starting to back out. I didn't mean to disturb you. You're not. He set down his pen. The library is yours to use whenever you wish. That was part of our agreement. Vivian moved to the shelves, running her fingers along the spines. You have an impressive collection. My grandfather's doing. He believed a man's library reflected his mind. Thornfield leaned back in his chair. What do you enjoy reading? Poetry mostly, though my father thought it frivolous. She pulled out a volume of Byron. He preferred I study household management. Byron is hardly frivolous, though I suppose Garrick would agree with your father. The way he said Edmund's name with that edge of distaste made her bold. You don't like him. I don't trust him. Thornfield stood and moved to stand near her, close enough that she could smell cedar and ink. I've made inquiries since you arrived. Your father's debts were real, but Garrick purchased them for far less than their face value. He could have negotiated a reasonable repayment plan. Instead, he demanded marriage. Vivian's breath caught. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know what you're walking into. If you return to him at the end of these 6 weeks, you'll be legally bound to a man who sees you as property he acquired at bargain price. And if I don't return to him, I'll be destitute. She met his eyes. You said yourself, if you give a negative assessment, I lose everything. So what choice do I actually have, Your Grace? Something flickered across his face. Frustration, perhaps, or regret. I don't know yet, but I'm working on finding you one. Before she could ask what he meant, the library door burst open and a whirlwind in burgundy silk swept into the room. Callum, why didn't you tell me you were harboring a young woman? The newcomer stopped, taking in Vivian's presence. Oh, you must be Miss Thorne. Vivian, may I present the Duchess of Marbury, my godmother? Thornfield's tone was resigned. Your Grace, you were supposed to arrive next week. I moved up my visit when I heard the gossip. The Duchess was perhaps 60, with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. Edmund Garrick is spreading rumors that you're corrupting his innocent fiancé. I thought I should observe the situation personally. Vivian felt ice slide down her spine. Corrupting? Oh, pay it no mind, dear. Edmund is a snake who lies for sport. The Duchess settled onto a sofa with proprietary ease. But his lies have influence, which is why I'm here. To ensure my godson conducts this guardianship in a manner above reproach. I'm always above reproach, Thornfield said dryly. Yes, you're tediously proper. It's one of your few flaws. She turned her sharp gaze on Vivian. Tell me, Miss Thorne, do you want to marry Edmund Garrick? The direct question, asked in front of Thornfield, felt like a trap. My father arranged. I didn't ask about your father. I asked about you. The Duchess leaned forward. I'm very old and very rich, which means I've earned the right to rudeness. So I'll ask again. Do you want to marry that man? Vivian looked at Thornfield, who watched her with unreadable intensity. Then she made a choice, the same impulsive truth-telling that always got her into trouble. No, she said clearly. I don't want to marry him. I never did. The Duchess smiled, a sharp, satisfied expression. Good. Then we have 6 weeks to find you an alternative. Callum, I'll be staying in the East Wing. Have Mrs. Winters prepare my usual rooms. After she swept out, leaving chaos in her wake, Vivian turned to Thornfield. You can't find you an alternative. He moved closer, his expression intense. Why not? You've just admitted in front of a witness that the marriage contract was signed under duress. That's grounds for challenge. But the debts can be managed other ways. I have resources, connections. 6 weeks to explore every legal option. His hand lifted as if he might touch her face, then dropped. You don't have to be a sacrifice, Vivienne. Not if you'll let me help you. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this powerful man with his grand estate and his fierce godmother could somehow undo the trap Edmund had built around her. But she'd learned that hope was dangerous. And if you fail, if there's no alternative and I still have to marry him at the end of 6 weeks, won't your interference just make him angrier, make my life harder? Thornfield's jaw tightened. Then I'll make sure he knows the entire aristocracy is watching how he treats you, that any cruelty will have consequences. You can't protect me forever. No, he agreed quietly. But I can protect you for 6 weeks, and perhaps that will be enough. That night, lying in her comfortable bed in her elegant rooms, Vivian allowed herself to wonder what it would be like to actually be free, to choose her own path, to belong to no one but herself. It felt like a fantasy. But Callum Ravenswood was starting to make it feel like possibility, and that, she suspected, was more dangerous than anything Edmund had done to her. The second week brought unexpected changes. The Duchess of Marbury proved to be a disruptive force of nature, reorganizing the household schedule to include afternoon teas where she held court with local ladies, subtly gathering information and allies. Reputation is currency, she told Vivian during one of their private conversations. Right now, Edmund controls the narrative about you. We're going to change that. She insisted Vivian attend a village charity event, appearing at Thornfield's side as his ward. It was Vivian's first public outing since the engagement ball, and her hands shook as they entered the small assembly hall. But the Duchess had prepared the ground well. The local gentry greeted Vivian with warmth, asking her opinions on the charity's work, treating her as a person of value rather than scandal. Several of the women were sharp-eyed ladies of influence who made pointed comments about poor young women being forced into unfortunate arrangements. Thornfield stayed near her throughout the evening, a quiet presence at her shoulder. When Lord Helmsley, the same man who had laughed at Edmund's crude jokes, tried to corner her with invasive questions about her engagement, Thornfield stepped smoothly between them. Miss Thorne is under my protection, Helmsley. That means she doesn't answer to you. His voice was pleasant, but the steel beneath was unmistakable. I trust that's clear. Helmsley retreated, and Vivian felt something warm bloom in her chest. He chose her. In that small moment, in front of witnesses, Callum Ravenswood had chosen her worth over social comfort. Later, as they walked through Thornfield's gardens in the twilight, she found the courage to thank him. You didn't have to defend me against Lord Helmsley. He's influential. He's an ass! Thornfield's hands were clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. And yes, I did have to defend you. That's what protection means. Is that all I am to you? The question escaped before she could stop it. An obligation? A problem to solve? He stopped walking and turned to face her, the setting sun casting his features in gold and shadow. "No," he said quietly. "You're not an obligation, Vivian. You're—" What? For a long moment she thought he might actually tell her, might explain the way his eyes followed her at meals, the careful distance he maintained even as he seemed to lean toward her like a plant seeking light. But then he shook his head. "You're my ward for 4 more weeks. That's all that can matter right now." "Why?" She moved closer, emboldened by frustration. "Because of propriety? Because Edmund might use any affection between us as ammunition? Because if I allow myself to feel what I'm starting to feel, I won't be able to remain objective. And you need objectivity right now more than you need—" He stopped himself. "More than I need what?" "More than you need me to be selfish." He stepped back, re-establishing the distance. "Come. It's getting dark, and the Duchess will worry." They walked back to the house in silence, but Vivian's heart raced with the implications of what he hadn't said. Callum Ravenswood felt something for her, something he was fighting, something that scared him enough to maintain rigid control. And she, trapped in this impossible situation, was starting to feel it too. The crisis came on a Tuesday afternoon during the 3rd week. Vivian was in the estate library, cataloguing damaged books that needed repair, a project she'd volunteered for because it gave her purpose. She'd just discovered a beautiful first edition of Paradise Lost, with a torn spine when raised voices echoed from the entrance hall. Edmund's voice, sharp with barely controlled rage. She set down the book with trembling hands and moved to the library door. Through the gap, she could see Edmund confronting Thornfield near the main staircase. "Keeping her from me deliberately," Edmund was saying. "The guardianship protocol allows for visits from the betrothed. I have every right—" "You have the right to nothing in this house." Thornfield's voice was ice. "The protocol allows for supervised visits at my discretion. I do not currently deem it appropriate." "Because you want her for yourself." Edmund's accusation rang through the hall. "Everyone in London is talking about it. The Duke of Thornfield, so rigidly proper, finally tempted by damaged goods." The sound of impact made Vivian flinch. She pushed the door open wider to see Thornfield gripping Edmund's coat, having slammed him against the wall with controlled violence. "Speak about her that way again," Thornfield said, his voice deadly quiet. "And guardianship protocols will be the least of your concerns. Are we clear?" Edmund's face had gone pale, but his eyes glittered with malice. "You've just assaulted me in front of witnesses, Your Grace. How properly aristocratic." Vivian realized several servants had frozen in their tasks, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Edmund was right. This would become gossip. More ammunition for him to use. She stepped into the hall before she could reconsider. "Lord Garrick, what an unexpected visit." Both men turned to look at her. Edmund's expression transformed instantly into a mask of injured concern. "My dear Vivian, I've been so worried about you, isolated out here without any word." "I've written you twice." Vivian kept her voice steady. "Surely you received my letters assuring you of my well-being." The lie was smooth, delivered with the same false courtesy Edmund had taught her. She saw understanding flash in Thornfield's eyes. She was playing the game, creating a paper trail that would protect them both. "Ah, yes, of course." Edmund extricated himself from Thornfield's grip and straightened his coat. "Though letters are no substitute for seeing you in person, you look well." "I am well, thank you." "And how are you occupying your time? I hope His Grace isn't finding you troublesome." The implications in that word made Vivian's skin crawl. "I'm assisting with the library catalogue and participating in local charitable work. The Duchess of Marbury has been a wonderful mentor." "How lovely." Edmund moved closer, invading her space in a way that made her want to retreat. "I look forward to continuing your education once we're married. There are so many things you still need to learn." The threat beneath his pleasant words was clear: obedience, submission, punishment for this period of relative freedom. Thornfield stepped between them, his body language protective even as his words remained formal. "As you can see, Miss Thorne is thriving. Your concerns are unfounded. I'll show you out. I'll find my own way." Edmund sketched a mocking bow. "Vivian, I'll visit again next week. Perhaps His Grace will be more accommodating about allowing us private time together. After he left, the hall remained frozen for a moment. Then Thornfield dismissed the servants with a curt gesture and turned to Vivienne. "Are you all right?" "I should ask you that question. You're the one who just committed assault in your own entrance hall." But her attempt at lightness fell flat. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she had to clasp them together. Thornfield noticed immediately. He guided her back into the library and closed the door, giving them privacy. "Sit down before you fall down." "I'm fine. You're terrified." "Sit." She sank onto the nearest chair, and he poured her a glass of brandy from the sideboard without asking. "Drink." The brandy burned, but it steadied her. Why did he really come? To test boundaries. To remind you that he still owns you. Thornfield paced the length of the library, agitation in every line of his body, and to gather evidence that I'm overstepping my role as guardian. You defended me. That's not overstepping. I put my hands on him in anger. That's exactly what he wanted. Thornfield stopped in front of her, frustration evident. I should have maintained control, should have been polite and distant. Instead, I gave him ammunition to claim I'm biased. Vivienne stood, moving closer to him. You were human. There's no crime in that. There is when your humanity puts you at risk. His eyes met hers, dark with emotion. I can't be what you need if I lose my objectivity, if I let anger cloud my judgment. And what do I need, Your Grace? The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been carefully not saying for 3 weeks. You need someone who can defeat Garrick legally, Thornfield said, but his voice lacked conviction. Someone who can find the loophole in those contracts, expose his fraud, give you real freedom. And if that someone doesn't exist, then you need someone strong enough to protect you, even after you're his wife. Someone who can make him afraid to mistreat you. That's not protection, Vivienne said softly. That's postponing inevitability. Thornfield's hands lifted as if to touch her, then dropped. I know. They stood in heavy silence, the truth weighing between them. All his resources, all his influence might not be enough to break the chains Edmund had forged, and they both knew it. I should return to my cataloguing, Vivienne finally said, though the thought of concentrating on damaged books felt impossible. Vivienne? Please don't. She stepped back. Don't apologize for defending me. Don't promise things you can't guarantee. Just let me work. He nodded stiffly and left, and Vivienne returned to her books with shaking hands. But that evening, during dinner, she found a note tucked beside her plate. Thornfield's handwriting bold and clear. You deserve to be chosen, not taken. She looked up the length of the table, meeting his eyes. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the note beyond that single, steady look. But it was enough. For now, it was enough to know he saw her, really saw her, even if the world was determined to make her invisible. The 4th week brought fresh disaster in the form of a letter from London. The Duchess of Marbury stormed into the breakfast room waving the paper like a battle standard. That conniving, manipulative weasel. Thornfield took the letter without comment and read it, his expression darkening. When did this arrive? This morning's post. It's already being circulated among half the aristocracy. The Duchess turned to Vivienne. Edmund has filed a formal complaint with the Guardian Council, claiming Callum is deliberately delaying your return and using undue influence to turn you against your contracted marriage. Vivienne's appetite disappeared. Can he do that? He can try. Thornfield set the letter down with controlled precision. He's demanding an official inquiry. The council will send a representative to interview you privately and assess whether I've exceeded my authority. This is absurd, the Duchess snapped. You've been nothing but proper, except when I physically restrained him in front of witnesses. Thornfield's voice was flat. He's using that incident to build his case. Vivienne felt panic rising. What happens if the council finds in his favor? The guardianship ends immediately. You return to London, and the wedding proceeds within the week. Thornfield looked at her directly. Edmund is escalating. He's worried that we're finding alternatives, so he's trying to force a conclusion before we can act. Are we? Vivienne asked. Finding alternatives? The pause that followed told her everything. There are options we're exploring, the Duchess said carefully, but none are guaranteed. so I still might end up married to him. Neither of them contradicted her. The inquiry was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Edmund doubled his efforts, making daily appearances at Thornfield's gates, each time with a new complaint or demand. He wanted private access to Vivian. He wanted her letters to him made public. He wanted proof she wasn't being coerced. On the second day, he brought a witness, a pinch-faced woman who claimed to be his cousin's companion. She testified to the council representative that she'd seen Thornfield and Vivian walking alone together in the gardens at an inappropriate hour, their heads close together in intimate conversation. It was a lie, but a plausible one. They had walked in the gardens. They had spoken privately. The intimacy was harder to deny because it existed, even if they'd never acted on it. "I've never been alone with Miss Thorne in any inappropriate manner," Thornfield told the council representative, a severe man named Lord Justice Pemberton. "Every interaction has been conducted with full awareness of propriety. Yet you struck her fiancé in your own home. I restrained him when he became aggressive. There's a difference." "Is there?" Pemberton made notes in his ledger. "To outside observers, Your Grace, your behavior suggests personal investment beyond appropriate guardianship. Lord Garrick believes you're attempting to supplant him in Miss Thorne's affections. Lord Garrick is paranoid and controlling, which is precisely why Miss Thorne needs protection. That's not your determination to make. The marriage contract was signed legally. Your role is to assess her character, not interfere with her contractual obligations." The interview with Vivian was worse. Pemberton questioned her with relentless precision, trying to trip her into admitting feelings for Thornfield, or complaints about Edmund, or any hint that the guardianship had become something more than professional. "Do you want to marry Lord Garrick?" he asked for the third time. Vivian had learned her lesson from the last time she'd answered that question honestly. "I want to honor my father's arrangements." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer that matters, my lord. My father signed the contracts. I'll abide by them, even though the Duke of Thornfield has offered you alternatives." The trap was obvious, but avoiding it felt impossible. "His Grace has been researching legal options, as is his right as my guardian, but I'm not under any illusion that those options are guaranteed." "You sound resigned to your fate." "I sound realistic, my lord." After Pemberton left, promising a decision within 2 days, Vivian found Thornfield in the library, staring out the window with his shoulders rigid. "It's going to fail," she said quietly. "We don't know that yet." "Yes, we do." She moved to stand beside him. "Pemberton has already decided. Edmund has too much evidence of whatever this is between us. Even if we've done nothing wrong, the appearance is enough. I won't let him take you back." The words were fierce, desperate. "There has to be something." "There isn't." Vivian felt strange calm settling over her. "I've known from the beginning this was hopeless. You tried, the Duchess tried, but some traps are too well built to escape." Thornfield turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw his composure crack. "I can't just hand you over to him. Not now. Not after—" "After what?" He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and for one breathless moment, she thought he might actually kiss her, might throw away all his careful control and just take what they both wanted. Instead, his hand came up to cup her cheek, so gentle it made her want to cry. "After I've seen who you really are," he said quietly. "After watching you be brave and kind and sharp-witted. After listening to you laugh with the servants and argue philosophy with my godmother. After realizing that you're exactly the kind of woman I didn't know I was waiting for." Vivian leaned into his touch, allowing herself this one moment of honesty. "I've never been chosen before, not really. My father chose convenience, Edmund chose investment, but you—" "I choose you," Thornfield finished. "Every day I choose you, even knowing I'll likely have to let you go." "Then why maintain the distance?" Her voice broke. "If we're going to lose anyway, why not—" "Because if we cross that line, Edmund wins completely. He'll use it as proof that the guardianship was a sham, that I corrupted you. It won't just end the inquiry. It will destroy your reputation completely. You'll lose any chance of a respectable life, even outside of marriage to him. Maybe I don't care about respectability anymore." "You should, because respectability is the only weapon we have left." He dropped his hand and stepped back, the distance between them feeling like miles. When Pemberton delivers his ruling, I need to be able to stand before the aristocracy and swear on my honor that I conducted this guardianship without impropriety. That's your only protection. Vivienne wanted to argue, wanted to rail against the unfairness of a system that punished her for being wanted by a good man while forcing her toward a cruel one. But she could see the logic in his position, even as it broke her heart. "How much time do we have left?" she asked. "Pemberton will rule within 2 days. If he finds in Edmund's favor, you'll return to London immediately." Thornfield's jaw tightened. 2 more days, that's all. Then I should make the most of them. She left him standing in the library and retreated to her rooms, where she finally allowed herself to cry. Not for the loss of freedom, she'd known that was likely from the start, but for the loss of possibility, for those brief weeks when Callum Ravenswood had made her believe she could be chosen, could matter, could be more than currency in men's transactions. That night, she couldn't sleep. Near midnight, she pulled on a dressing gown and ventured down to the library, seeking the comfort of books. She'd been cataloguing a collection of botanical illustrations and focusing on the precise drawings of flowers might quiet her racing mind. The library door was ajar, lamplight spilling into the darkened hallway. She pushed it open quietly, expecting to find the room empty. Instead, she found Thornfield at his desk, surrounded by papers, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. He looked up at her entrance and she saw exhaustion and frustration written across his features. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. "I keep searching for the loophole I know doesn't exist." He gestured at the scattered documents. "Your father's contracts with Garrick, marriage law, property law, guardianship protocols. There has to be something I'm missing." Vivienne moved closer, looking at the papers. "You've been doing this every night, haven't you? I'm not going to stop trying until Pemberton forces my hand." She saw it then, the toll this was taking on him. The rigid control that defined him was fracturing under the weight of his determination to save her, and the growing realization that he might fail. Callum. She used his name without his title for the first time. "You've done everything you could, more than anyone else would have." He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "It's not enough. You deserved someone who could actually save you, not just delay your imprisonment. You gave me 6 weeks of feeling like I mattered. That's more than I expected to have in my entire life." 6 weeks, he repeated bitterly. "And then what? I hand you back to Garrick and spend the rest of my life knowing I abandoned you to him. You're not abandoning me. You're following the law. The law is wrong." He stood abruptly, the force of his movement scattering papers. "The law that lets men like your father gamble away their daughters. The law that treats women as property to be bought and sold. The law that says, I can't protect you because some bastard signed a piece of paper while you were grieving. All of it is wrong and I can't—" He broke off, turning away from her, his hands braced on the desk. Vivienne moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his body. "Then break the law." "What?" "You heard me. If the law is wrong, break it. Refuse to send me back. Let Edmund sue you, let the aristocracy censure you. Choose me anyway. You don't understand what you're asking." But his voice lacked conviction. "I understand perfectly. I'm asking you to risk everything you've built, your reputation, your standing, your perfect propriety, for someone who can give you nothing in return. I'm asking you to be selfish for once in your carefully controlled life." Thornfield turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes nearly undid her. "If I do that, if I defy the council and keep you here by force, Edmund will bring charges, real legal charges, not just social censure. I could lose Thornfield. The estate that's been in my family for 200 years, everything." "I know. And you'd still be trapped, because the marriage contract would still stand. You'd be neither my wife nor legally free. Just a woman living in sin, with a man who destroyed himself for her. Would that be so terrible?" She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Living here with you, even without legal sanction. For you, yes. You'd be ruined. Unmarriageable. If anything happened to me, you'd have nothing." His hand tightened on hers. "I won't do that to you. I won't make you choose between Edmund's cruelty and social destruction." "What if I want to choose destruction?" The words came out fierce. What if I'd rather be ruined and free than respectable and owned? You say that now, I mean it now, and I'll mean it tomorrow, and the day after, and every day for the rest of my life. She pulled his hand to her chest, pressing his palm against her racing heart. Feel that. That's me choosing you, Callum. Not because I have to, not because I'm grateful, but because in 6 weeks you've shown me what it means to be valued, and I can't go back to being nothing. For one suspended moment she thought she'd convinced him, thought he might actually pull her into his arms and make the reckless choice that would save them both. Then he gently extracted his hand and stepped back. I can't let you sacrifice yourself for me, I won't. Even if it's what I want. Especially then. His voice was raw. Because you deserve better than the life that choice would give you. You deserve security, respectability, a future that isn't defined by scandal and loss. I deserve to choose my own fate, not if that fate destroys you. They stared at each other across 3 feet of space that felt insurmountable. Vivian realized then that his propriety wasn't just about social rules. It was how he protected people. He would rather break his own heart than allow her to sacrifice her future for him. It was noble and infuriating in equal measure. Then I suppose we're at an impasse, she said quietly. You won't let me choose destruction, and I won't go back to Edmund willingly. You won't have to go back willingly. Pemberton's ruling will force it. Only if you comply. I will comply. Because that's the only way to keep you safe long term. He moved toward the door, putting more distance between them. Go back to bed, Vivian. We both need rest. Callum, please, I can't. His voice cracked. I can't keep having this conversation. I can't keep wanting what I can't have. Just go. She left, but not before seeing him sink back into his chair, his head in his hands, the picture of a man torn apart by impossible choices. In her room, Vivian made her own decision. If Callum wouldn't break the law, she would. If Pemberton ruled against them, she wouldn't go quietly. She would make a scene, force Edmund to drag her away in front of witnesses, make the aristocracy see exactly what their precious contracts enabled. It might not change anything, but at least she would go down fighting, at least she would choose herself, even if no one else would. Lord Justice Pemberton delivered his ruling the next afternoon, in Thornfield's formal drawing room, with the Duchess of Marbury as witness. After thorough consideration of the evidence and interviews with all parties, Pemberton read from his prepared statement, I find that the Duke of Thornfield has conducted the guardianship of Miss Vivian Thorn with appropriate propriety. However, that single word fell like a guillotine blade. However, the evidence suggests that emotional attachment has developed between guardian and ward, creating a conflict of interest that compromises the Duke's objectivity. While no explicit impropriety occurred, the appearance of bias is sufficient to warrant concern. Therefore, I rule that the guardianship must conclude immediately. Miss Thorn will return to London tomorrow, accompanied by representatives of the Guardian Council, to resume her contracted engagement to Lord Edmund Garrick. The wedding will proceed as originally scheduled. Vivian felt the room tilt. Tomorrow. Not even 2 more days. Tomorrow. This is outrageous, the Duchess protested. You're punishing them for having human feelings. I'm enforcing the law, Your Grace. The Duke's personal feelings, however understandable, do not supersede legal contracts. Pemberton turned to Thornfield. You will prepare Miss Thorn's belongings for departure. Lord Garrick has been notified and will meet the party in London. No. Vivian's voice was steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. I refuse. Pemberton looked at her as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. You don't have that option, Miss Thorn. Don't I? You can rule all you like, but you can't physically force me into a carriage against my will. That would be kidnapping. It would be enforcement of a legal contract your father signed. My father's signature doesn't make me property. She stood, facing Pemberton directly. I am a human being with agency, and I'm telling you now, before witnesses, I do not consent to this marriage. I never have. The contract was signed while I was grieving under duress, without my true, informed consent. Your father had legal authority. My father is dead. His authority ended with him. Vivian's voice gained strength. I am 27 years old, of sound mind, and I refuse this arrangement. If Edmund Garrick wants to sue for breach of contract, let him. But I will not willingly return to him. Pemberton's face reddened. You're being hysterical. She's being clear. Thornfield's voice cut across the room like a blade. And she's right. A contract signed under duress is challengeable. If Miss Thorne publicly refuses consent, forcing her compliance becomes far more complicated legally. You're encouraging her rebellion, Pemberton accused. I'm observing legal fact. If she refuses to go, you'll have to bring charges of breach of contract. That means a public trial. Evidence presented. Testimony heard. Thornfield's smile was sharp. Are you certain Edmund Garrick wants his business practices examined in open court? Pemberton's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his features. What are you implying? I'm implying that I've spent 6 weeks investigating Lord Garrick's affairs, and I found some fascinating discrepancies in how he acquired Miss Thorne's father's debts. Thornfield produced a sheaf of papers from his desk. The gambling debts Garrick claims to have purchased, they were sold to him by a broker who doesn't legally exist. The land contracts he's demanding, they reference property boundaries that were redrawn 5 years ago, making the original surveys invalid. Vivian stared at him. You found a loophole. I found evidence of fraud. Thornfield's eyes never left Pemberton's face. Garrick built his contract on falsified documents, which means the entire arrangement is void. The silence that followed was electric. Pemberton recovered first. That's a serious accusation, Your Grace. Do you have proof? Enough to warrant a full investigation, which I'm prepared to demand publicly if you attempt to enforce this guardianship ruling. You're bluffing. Try me. Thornfield's voice was ice. Force Miss Thorne back to London, and I'll bring these documents to every magistrate, every newspaper, every influential lord in England. Garrick's reputation will be destroyed, and yours, Lord Pemberton, will be tarnished by association for having ruled in favour of a fraudster. Vivian watched Pemberton calculate odds, weighing reputation against principle. She could see the moment he decided self-preservation mattered more than enforcement. This investigation you propose, Pemberton said carefully. It would require time, official channels, proper procedure. Indeed, I estimate at least 6 months to thoroughly examine the evidence, and during that time Miss Thorne's status would be unchanged. She would remain here under my protection until the investigation concludes. That's highly irregular. So is enforcing contracts built on fraud. The Duchess spoke up, her voice carrying aristocratic authority that made Pemberton flinch. I think Callum's proposal is eminently reasonable. Launch the investigation. If the contracts prove legitimate, Miss Thorne returns to Garrick. If they're fraudulent, she's free. Either way, justice is served. Pemberton looked between them. Thornfield's steady challenge, the Duchess's imperious expectation, and Vivian's defiant stance. He was trapped, and he knew it. I'll recommend the investigation to the council, he said stiffly. But understand, Your Grace, if your evidence doesn't support these claims, you'll face serious consequences for making false accusations. I'm aware. I'll take that risk. After Pemberton left, promising a formal response within days, Vivian turned to Thornfield with wonder and disbelief warring in her chest. Did you really find fraud? Or was that an elaborate bluff? Both. He set the papers on his desk. The evidence exists, but it's circumstantial. Strong enough to warrant investigation, but not strong enough to guarantee conviction. I'm buying us time, not freedom. Not yet. But it's a chance. It's a chance, he agreed. 6 months, possibly longer if we can stretch the investigation. 6 months where you're safe here, where Garrick can't touch you, where we can search for more definitive proof. The Duchess smiled triumphantly. You magnificent, devious boy, I taught you well. You taught me that power means nothing if you won't use it to protect people who matter. Thornfield looked at Vivian. I couldn't save you through propriety. So I chose strategy instead. That was your third irreversible action, the Duchess observed quietly. Threatening a council representative, risking your reputation on circumstantial evidence, publicly declaring your protection of Vivian regardless of social consequence. You've just burned several important bridges, Callum. I know. The aristocracy will talk. Some will support you. Others will view you as having lost your objectivity. Let them talk. Thornfield moved to stand before Vivian, his expression intense. I'm tired of propriety mattering more than people. tired of maintaining perfect appearances while women like you are sold to men like Garrick. If protecting you costs me social standing, so be it. Vivian felt tears pressing behind her eyes. You shouldn't have to sacrifice. I'm not sacrificing anything that matters. I'm choosing what matters instead. He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture that felt both courtly and deeply intimate. 6 months, Vivian. I promise you 6 months of safety while we build a real case against him. And if at the end we still can't prove the fraud, then we'll face that when it comes. She managed a shaky smile. But right now, for the first time in months, I have hope. Because of you. The Duchess dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Well, I suppose I should write to my solicitors. If we're investigating Edmund Garrick, we'll need the best legal minds in England. As she swept from the room, leaving them alone, Thornfield kept hold of Vivian's hand. I meant what I said in the library last night, he told her quietly. You deserve better than what Edmund would give you, but you also deserve better than a half-life defined by scandal and uncertainty. So I'm going to prove the fraud. I'm going to free you completely. And then what? His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Then I'm going to court you properly, with flowers and poetry and all the ridiculous courtship rituals I've always found tedious. Because you deserve to be chosen, Vivian. Not rescued, not protected, but chosen freely, without coercion or desperation or impossible circumstances forcing the decision. What if I don't want to wait 6 months? Then we'll take it one day at a time. But I won't ask you to commit to me while you're still technically bound to him. That wouldn't be a choice, it would be another cage. He released her hand reluctantly. I want you free first, completely free, so that when you choose, it's real. Vivian understood what he was offering. Patience, propriety, the space to discover who she was outside of anyone's control. It was the opposite of Edmund's suffocating ownership, the opposite of her father's disregard. It was respect, and that mattered more than passion ever could. 6 months then, she agreed, to build our case and prove the fraud. And after? After, we'll see if you still want me when I'm not a damsel requiring rescue. His smile was soft and genuine. I'll want you more because you'll be yourself without compromise. The investigation that followed was brutal and thorough. The Duchess of Marbury leveraged every connection she had, hiring solicitors who specialized in contract fraud and investigators who could trace the labyrinth of Edmund Garrick's financial dealings. Edmund fought back with vicious precision. He spread rumors that Vivian had seduced Thornfield, that the investigation was revenge for a stolen lover, that the whole thing was an elaborate scheme to void legitimate contracts. He brought forward witnesses who swore to Vivian's father's gambling debts. He produced documents that looked authentic enough to create doubt. But Thornfield's investigators were better. They found the broker who had sold the debts to Edmund, a man who confessed under pressure that he'd been paid to falsify records. They discovered that 3 of Edmund's witnesses had received suspicious payments shortly before offering testimony. They uncovered a pattern of Edmund targeting vulnerable families, using manufactured debts to acquire property at below market value. It took 4 months to build the case, 4 months of watching evidence accumulate like stones in a foundation. And through it all, Vivian lived at Thornfield, safe and increasingly at peace. She spent her days working in the library, cataloguing the collection and making recommendations for repairs. She joined the Duchess in charitable work in the village, discovering a talent for organizing fundraisers. She learned to ride properly on one of Thornfield's gentle mares. She read voraciously, argued philosophy with Callum over evening tea, and slowly became someone she recognized in the mirror, not defined by fear or obligation, but by her own choices. Callum kept his promise. He courted her slowly, properly, with a patience that made every small gesture feel weighted with meaning. Fresh flowers appeared in her rooms each morning. He read poetry to her in the library, his voice turning Byron's verses into something intimate. They walked the gardens in the twilight, talking about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship that felt more solid than passion alone could provide. But the passion was there too, simmering beneath their careful propriety, the almost touches, the held gazes that lasted too long, the way his breath would catch when she laughed, the way her heart raced when he said her name. They were falling in love slowly, and it felt like coming home. The case against Edmund came to trial in month 5, held in a London courtroom packed with aristocratic observers. Vivian attended with Thornfield at her side, the Duchess flanking her other side like a protective dragon. Edmund was confident at first, his lawyers dismissing the evidence as circumstantial. But as witness after witness testified to his patterns of fraud, as documents were presented showing systematic corruption, his composure began to crack. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Lord Helmsley, the same man who had laughed at Edmund's crude jokes. Faced with evidence that Edmund had defrauded his own nephew using similar tactics, Helmsley turned witness for the prosecution. His testimony was damning, laying out years of schemes and manipulations. By the end of the second day, even Edmund's own lawyers looked uncomfortable. The magistrate's ruling came on the third day, swift and unequivocal. The marriage contract between Edmund Garrick and Vivian Thorne was declared void due to fraud in its foundational documents. Edmund was ordered to return all property obtained through false pretenses, banned from further business dealings in England, and placed under investigation for multiple counts of fraud that could lead to criminal charges. Vivian watched Edmund's face drain of colour as the ruling was read. For a moment, she thought he might accept defeat. Instead, he lunged across the courtroom toward her. "You ungrateful bitch! After everything I invested—" Thornfield intercepted him before he'd taken 3 steps, shoving him back with controlled violence. "Touch her, and it's the last thing you do." Guards surrounded Edmund, restraining him as he continued shouting accusations and threats. The magistrate ordered him removed, declaring him in contempt of court. As he was dragged away, still raging, Vivian felt something inside her finally release. She was free, truly, legally, completely free. In the hallway outside the courtroom, surrounded by well-wishers and curious observers, Thornfield took her hand. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Like I can breathe for the first time in a year." "Good." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Because there's something I need to ask you, now that you're no longer bound to anyone." "Callum, let me finish." He drew her slightly away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner. "I promised to court you properly once you were free. I've been waiting months for this moment, and I'm terrified." "Terrified? That you'll say no, that without the proximity forced by circumstance, you'll realize you don't want me. That you'll choose to explore the world on your own terms, without being tied to anyone." He took both her hands now. "And if that's what you choose, I'll respect it. But I need you to know, I love you, Vivian. Not because I protected you, not because we fought Edmund together, but because you're brilliant and brave and wonderfully stubborn, because you make me laugh, because you challenge me to be better than my rigid propriety allows, because you're you." Vivian felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were happy tears. "You love me, hopelessly, completely, irrevocably. Then you're in luck." She rose on her toes, bringing her face close to his. "Because I love you too, and I choose you, not because I need rescuing, not because you're convenient, but because you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You gave me space to become myself, and the woman I've become wants you in her life, today and every day after. Are you certain? You could have anyone now. I don't want anyone, I want you. The man who threw away propriety to save me. The man who reads poetry and argues about philosophy and gets that little crease between his eyebrows when he's worried. I want you, Callum. Choose me back." His smile was radiant, transforming his usually serious face into something joyful. "I choose you. Every day. In every way possible. Vivian Thorne, will you marry me? Not because of contracts or obligation, but because we want to build a life together." "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her then, in the hallway of the London courthouse, in front of witnesses and aristocrats and anyone who cared to look. It was thoroughly improper and absolutely perfect, and when they finally broke apart, the Duchess was dabbing her eyes and several elderly lords were applauding. "Well," the Duchess said warmly, "it's about time you two stopped being so tediously proper." The wedding took place 3 months later at Thornfield, with half the aristocracy in attendance. Vivian wore her mother's pearls and a dress the colour of morning sky. The Duchess served as matron of honour, crying through the entire ceremony despite her attempts at composure. As Callum slipped the ring onto her finger, Vivienne looked out at the assembled guests and realized how far she'd come. From the woman hiding in a dressing room, trying to escape her fate, to this, standing freely beside a man who loved her, choosing her future with clear eyes and open heart. "I love you," she whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. "I love you," he whispered back, "and I choose you, today and always." They kissed to thunderous applause, and Vivienne felt complete for the first time in her life. She was no longer the woman who hid. She was the woman who was chosen, and who chose herself. Epilogue. 3 months after the wedding, Vivienne stood in what had been the dowager's morning room and was now her personal study. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the rose garden, illuminating the desk where she worked on correspondence for the charitable foundation she'd established with the Duchess. The foundation helped women escape coercive marriage contracts, providing legal support and financial assistance. It was funded partly by the damages Edmund had been ordered to pay before fleeing England to avoid criminal prosecution. Vivienne took fierce satisfaction in using his money to undo the harm men like him caused. Callum appeared in the doorway, loosening his cravat after a long day managing estate business. "Mrs. Winters says you've been working since dawn. Should I be jealous of these letters?" "Fiercely jealous. They're very demanding correspondence." She set down her pen and moved into his embrace. "How was your day?" "Productive. The new tenants are settling in well. And I received word that Parliament is considering that marriage law reform we discussed, the one requiring a woman's personal consent for contracts, not just her father's approval. Because of our case. Because you refused to be silent about what happened to you. Your testimony during Edmund's trial changed minds, Vivienne. Women are writing to Parliament, sharing their own stories. You started something important." She leaned her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "We started it. You're the one who fought the system to save me. I just provided the legal strategy. You provided the courage." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Come, dinner can wait. I want to show you something." He led her through the house and out to the gardens, where twilight was painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Near the rose garden, a new stone bench had been installed, simple and elegant. "Read the inscription," Callum said softly. Vivienne knelt to see the words carved into the stone. "For those who were hidden, and those who chose to be seen." Tears pricked her eyes. "Callum, I wanted something permanent. A reminder that hiding isn't weakness, it's survival. But choosing to be seen, choosing yourself, that's courage." He pulled her to her feet and wrapped his arms around her. "You taught me that. The woman who hid in a dressing room and found me there. The woman who refused to disappear quietly. The woman who chose herself when no one else would. You chose me too. Best decision I ever made." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, the way he did now that they had all the time in the world, and no one to hide from. "What do you want to do tomorrow?" Vivienne smiled against his lips. "Anything, because now I can choose." "Then choose me, every day." "I do choose you. Today, tomorrow, always." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other in darkness and built something luminous from the ruins of what had tried to destroy them. She was no longer the woman who hid. She was the woman who was chosen and who chose herself. And that made all the difference. If this story found you in a moment when you needed to feel seen, valued, and chosen, I'm so glad you stayed until the end. Your presence here means everything. These stories exist because of you, and I'm honored you spent this time with Vivienne and Callum. If this resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like. Comment with your thoughts or share this with someone who might need this message. And if you're ready for another journey, subscribe and turn on notifications.